All right, Notre Dame fans, welcome to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. I'm Vince D'Addario. That guy right there is Brian Driscoll. He's the publisher at irishbreakdown.com. I'm the football analyst, and guess what? We got to analyze some football, and I'm fired up about it. Got to watch a little film over Oklahoma State, and we're going to talk about the Oklahoma State offense today, and I'm pretty fired up about it. We're finally back to game prep, right? It's game prep, little Christmas, and then some more game prep, and then we have a game, which is fantastic. I could not be more excited about it. So, Brian, today is the Oklahoma State offense. We're gonna dive in. We're gonna give a little bit of an overview of what they do for those people who haven't seen Oklahoma State and know what to expect. Because look, Notre Dame doesn't play a lot of Big 12 teams, right? So this is a cool matchup for that reason.
Yeah, and when they've either been in recent years, it's been like Iowa State, who wasn't that good. And then they played Oklahoma back in 12 and 13. And, that was kind of in the height of the Big 12 being a big explosive offensive era. And the Big 12 was different this year. I mean, if you look at the two best teams in the Big 12 this year, Oklahoma State and Baylor, they were defense first teams. I mean, They won because of defense and running the football. And it really makes this a fun matchup. And, it's not often we get to cover a game of this magnitude where it's an opponent that Notre Dame has never played before.
Right, exactly.
And that's the situation we find ourselves in now. And the intriguing aspect of this matchup is it's a strength versus question mark in both sides of the ball, but the question mark played better down the stretch for the most part. And what I mean by that is both teams, Notre Dame and Baylor and Oklahoma State, were really good on defense this year.
Right.
Oklahoma State was good all year. Notre Dame took a couple games to get going, and then they were really good the rest of the way. And their offenses were a little shaky, but finished strong. And so that's kind of what makes this, in my opinion, a really intriguing matchup, because it's strength versus question mark. Which strength can perform the best and which question mark can perform the best? And so that's going to be, so what basically what comes down to is the offense that plays better maybe than it did most of the season is going to have the biggest say in who wins this football game. And so for Notre Dame, it's going to be about keeping an Oklahoma State offense that has not been great at scoring points against good teams in check. And if they can do that, then they should win the game. If they can't, then it's going to be much tougher, because as we'll show tomorrow when we do our podcast on the Oklahoma State defense, it's a very, very, very good defensive football team. And it is intriguing too, because it's Oklahoma State is kind of a narrative buster. And, we did a recruiting breakdown, a recruiting comparison of the two teams. Oklahoma State has one player in their entire two deep that plays. That was a 4-star or better recruit. That's the quarterback, Spencer Sanders, who, in my opinion, is the biggest question mark they have on this football team. You know what I mean? You see so up and down.
Oh, yeah.
This is a team loaded with 3-star recruits that are just good football players. There's some JUCO kids. The running back's a JUCO kid. There's some JUCO kids in there, some transfers in there from the MAC. I think their center, who I don't know if he's going to play or not. He got injured down the stretch. He was a MAC transfer, I believe. It's an interesting football team, and it's not an explosive offense like we've seen from Oklahoma State in the past. This is not Brandon Whedon's Oklahoma State football team. You know what I mean? No. This is not, the Mason Rudolph Oklahoma State football team. This is a physical, well-coached, sound, quality offense that doesn't really strike fear into your heart, but if you don't do the job, they can move the chains, they can keep your offense off the field, and they complement their defense really, really well, which is what makes this matchup really intriguing. Is can Notre Dame step up and do what they've done all year on defense and kind of do what Baylor did in the title game, which is just get the ball back to your offense early and often and jump on them. And but it's going to be a fun matchup. I've always liked Oklahoma State. I like Mike Gundy. I've always have. He's an interesting guy. He's been there a long time.
He's passionate about his. He played there. He's an assistant there. Now he's the head. He's a lifer at Oklahoma State. He's passionate about it.
He's older than 40 now, but that rant about I'm 40. That. I'm a man. I'll always love that.
Can you talk about that for a second?
Sure.
Because This is so. What? So how long ago was that? Do you know what approximately what
I'll
year
look it
that
up.
was?
Because that's back when he had the spiky hair. It was
Yes,
pre-mullet days. Yeah.
and I remember thinking to myself, man, 40's old. Like
Mhm.
that's what. So that's how long ago it was.
Right.
You know what I mean? And now I'm like, man, 40. He's a kid when he did
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
It's amazing how your perspective changes as you get older. But
14 years old. I just read an article from September that it was 14 years ago. So it was
wow,
basically going to be like 2007-ish. So think
wow,
about that. Think
yeah,
about when that was going on. So
yeah,
that was during the Charlie Weiss era.
wow.
Yeah.
That was 4 kids ago for me. So that was a
Yeah.
long time ago. That
Yeah.
was so, but yeah, but look, again, he's passionate about his players and
Right.
he's not afraid to show it. I love that in a coach personally. And so, yeah, you're right. I've kind of not followed Oklahoma State, but, you know, they have always been on my radar for whatever reason. They just always have. And maybe it was because of the I'm a man speech. I'm not sure that will live in infamy for him. I'm sure. But I love his passion for his players. I mean, he's not afraid to show it. And I love that.
Before we begin, Vince, there's a new person in our chat that I haven't seen before, and I just want to pull them up because I love their name. I watched Ghostbusters the other day, so of
Did you
course,
really?
yeah, it'll be on YouTube TV, and I'll just randomly pop it up at like 2 o'clock in the morning when I'm working on the
That's
background,
funny.
and I ain't afraid of no goats. That's just a great name. If y'all don't remember, if you're too young, that's the theme song from Ghostbusters.
How could anybody forget that?
Some people are young and
Yeah,
they
you're
think
right.
the Ghostbusters movie's the one with Melissa McCarthy. So,
And they think
um,
40's old. So there you go.
yeah, that's true. Very true.
Yeah.
So I just welcome to the show and welcome everybody else that's new. Let's get into some football, Vince, because this is a very intriguing matchup that I'm looking forward to
It
talking
is.
about.
And look, this offense isn't going to, they're not going to run anything that's going to be exotic, that's going to be crazy. I mean, you're going to know what they're going to run, but they're going to run it for the most part efficiently. They've got guys that can break some stuff, and they've got a hard-nosed runner in the backfield. But they're not going to do anything that's going to trick you. You know what I mean? They're going to come out.
Well, yeah, for the most part, that's true, and that's kind of what they've been. And what's interesting about them, and let's pull up their
there
numbers,
we
is
go.
they're a pretty just kind of basic, middle of the road,
Yeah.
middle to bottom of the pack of the Big 12. Now, keep in mind, there's only 10 teams in the Big 12. I know there's 14 in the Big 10. I understand all that, but and we wonder why kids have trouble with math nowadays. But as you see, 30.6 points. I mean, you know what they honestly look like, Vince? They look like a Notre Dame offense from the last decade. I mean, that's
Right.
like
Right.
barely over 30. Good run game.
Mm-hmm.
Just don't get yourself beat and rely on your defense to win the game. I mean, that's kind of what they are.
Everything you described about Oklahoma State earlier on, when you started talking about, I'm like, that sounds oddly familiar.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
it's kind of.
When you look at it, they don't score a ton, and the thing about their scoring offense too is they've got a 63 and a 55-point game on their docket that jumps that average up. I mean,
True.
they started the season 6-0 before losing to Iowa State, and in that 6-0 stretch, they only scored more than 30 points twice, or really more than 28 points twice. Now it's 31 points on Kansas State and 32 points on Texas. After the loss to Baylor, they came back and scored 55 on Kansas. They scored 63 on TCU, but only 23 against Texas Tech, only 24 against West Virginia. Scored 37 against Oklahoma, but they had some special teams and defense set up some scores and had some scores. And then, of course, the offense struggled in the Big 12 title game against Baylor. So it's a pretty mediocre offense. The one area where they rank super high nationally, is plays.
Yeah.
They run a lot of plays. They rank 8th nationally in the country with 973 plays run, which makes their yards per game number even less impressive. And that's why you look at it, that yards per play number is way lower. 91st out of 130 teams, because they're just not a big play offense. They're a grind it out.
They're going to nickel and dime you.
Yeah, you talked about that they're not going to do a lot of things to trick you. What's interesting about that is true more often than not. But when they're in a game that they don't think they have the better players, they will run trick stuff. They will do like bubble screen fakes and throw deep. They'll throw flea flickers. they'll try to scheme where they'll try to find some ways to it's not tricking you, but they'll use their play action try effectively. Those aren't trick plays though. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about like they don't like they used to run like jet sweeps and reverses. They used to be like super creative offensively. They're not that anymore.
That's not what I got. Yeah.
They don't want to put themselves behind the sticks. They don't want to, they don't. And it's funny. We had to listen to Notre Dame's head coach all year talk about how young they are. They actually are young. Like 4 of their top 7 receivers are true freshmen. And one of the other top 7 is a redshirt freshman. They have a running back who's a JUCO kid. So I mean, they actually are young. And the skill players. And so I think they look at it and say, look, we could run like some of the offenses we used to run, but they haven't been that great on offense the last couple of years. They actually are 0.6 ahead of where they were the year before. They haven't been close to 40 points a game since 2018. So they just haven't been that offense in a while. And they've shifted to more of a just really kind of grinded out type of football team. 2 years ago, Chuba Hubbard had a 2,000 plus yard season, big season. They were much more of a big play running game back then. This year, you look Jaylen Warren, he's at 4.8 yards a carry. Again, he's the JUCO kid, first year player. He missed the Big 12 title game, didn't play in that game. Spencer Sanders is their number 2 leading rusher. He had over 500 yards, 6 touchdowns, 4.2 yards. Yeah,
if you
we'll get into that for sure.
Yeah,
and then their next 2 backs, Dominic Richardson had 4.7 yards per carry. Their next back, Desmond Jackson, he's the kid that got caught short of the end zone, and against Baylor, he averaged 2.9 yards a carry. They're only at 4.1 yards per carry, which is obviously not a great number. And it's just they're really not a big play offense like they've been in the past. They really aren't.
Hey, we got an Oklahoma State fan. I want to throw it up because we love when opposing fans come on in. Brian Ney, Oklahoma State alum here. Sanders makes bad decisions. We hate that about him.
Oh, trust me, we're going to have plenty to say about that. We won't say a ton about that today, Brian, because this is more of an introduction into kind of who Oklahoma State is offensively and defensively, just kind of a big picture standpoint. But, it's kind of interesting because the offense they play to protect the football. It's a don't make a mistake, get you beat.
Sounds familiar.
And you're right. But you look at it, they rank 72nd in the nation in turnovers. So you're like, well, something doesn't seem right here. But if you look at their game-by-game stats, a lot of their turnovers came in a small number of games. So they turned the ball over 19 times this season. They had 3 against Southwest Missouri State, 3 against Baylor, 3 against Oklahoma, and 4 more against Baylor. So that's 13 of their 19 turnovers came in 4 games. They had 4 games where they didn't turn it over at all. They had another 2, 3, 4 games where they only turned it over once. They were actually -1 on the season this year in turnovers, and a lot of that, to Brian's point, was Spencer Saunders. I mean, they had 19 turnovers, 13 of them were interceptions.
Yeah,
and he had 7 interceptions in the 2 games against Baylor, and they still had a chance to win that game at the end.
Yes, they did.
Which again says a lot about their defense and a lot about their ability to stay in games and then have that shot to win it at the end. So they're a very intriguing team, Vince. Very intriguing team. But
they are.
The one thing that stood out to me too, the reason that they run so many plays, number one, their defense just gets you off the field in a hurry. And the thing about it is they only forced 18 turnovers this season, which is a pretty low number. As I said, they were
defense that's as good as they
were a team that ranked in the top 10 in like scoring, efficiency, total defense, yards per play allowed. I believe they're top 10 in rushing defense as well. But they're like top 15 in a lot of categories, top 10 in a lot of categories. The one thing they don't do a lot of is force turnovers,
right?
Which speaks volumes to just how good they are at getting off the field. And just because again, they stop you from moving the ball, and they're really effective in that regards. I mean, they allowed opponents to only convert 25.8% of their third downs. Well, that gets the offense the ball a lot. And then the one thing the offense is good at is moving the chains on third down, as you see down there. That's the one category that and sacks allowed, which we'll get to.
top
where
20% in the country. I mean,
where they're top, they're number 25 in the country, and so
right.
that's an interesting aspect of their offense too. And they were actually 60% on third down against Baylor. 12 of 20 on third down against Baylor. And they've had some games where they're really good on third down. They were real steady early in the year, not great, but steady. Then they dipped down, against Texas. They weren't good on third down. They were really bad in their loss against Iowa State. Then they had a great game against TCU, a great game against Kansas, great game against Baylor from a third down standpoint. And then you look at it, but there's some ugly games in there too.
Sure.
And that's going to be the key for Notre Dame, is just don't let them move the ball. But that's the thing they're good at, is they're just going to chip away. And I think that, Vince, it's kind of we'll get when we get into the run game, it'll make a lot more sense of why these numbers look like they look.
Completely agree. Yeah,
but
no question.
Let's just kind of talk, Vince, a little bit about just the basic structure of the Oklahoma State football team. They are not what they used to be in regards to being explosive, but they structurally look a lot like what they they run a lot of 10 personnel, they run a lot of 11 personnel, and a lot of 12 personnel. Those are the three primary personnel groupings that we see. 10 personnel, 1 back, 0 tight ends, 4 receivers.
Yep.
11 being 1 back, one tight end, 3 receivers. 12 personnel being 1 tight end, or 1 back, 2 tight ends, 2 receivers. The interesting thing is, Vince, is they use their tight ends. They don't throw a lot to their tight ends, but they'll move their tight ends around a lot for blocking.
And they do it, a lot of it's pre-snap. And so they caught Oklahoma a bunch of times out of position because they were trying to move around and they were trying to match what Oklahoma State was doing, moving their tight ends back and forth. And then they would catch Oklahoma moving back and forth, right? So it was kind of a game of cat and mouse and a chess match between the two as they were moving their tight end from one side to the other, or they would have the tight end lined up at fullback and then they would move him to a wing. And then you'd see Oklahoma trying to adjust and then they would run the other way, right? I mean, right. So that they do a lot formationally to try to get you out of your strength, which is smart.
And they're going to use formations and they're going to use their tight ends a lot to try to gain leverage and numbers advantages. And it's a very traditional in that regards.
Yep.
And so they do some really intriguing things with it. We'll show you here real quick kind of what those look like. So to begin, let's look at their 10 personnel. This is what their starting lineup is based out of, basically, when it looks to their depth chart. They tend to list a 1 running back, 4 receivers is, kind of how they start the game. It is 4 traditional receivers. Vince, when we talk about their receiving core, it's not special. And the one thing Oklahoma State, even going back to when I was a kid, I remember, Barry Sanders was such a great player back in 1988. His quarterback was Mike Gundy, a guy that was overlooked on that team because of how great Thurman Thomas was the year before and Barry Sanders was a receiver named Hartley Dykes, who was a 1,000-yard receiver back then. And they've just produced a lot of really good receivers over the years, and including Justin Blackman in somewhat recent time, and Tylan Wallace, who just was a really good receiver for them, got hurt late in his career, but they've had some really good receivers. James Washington in recent years. They're really young at receiver this year. Like, it's a group that you're like, boy, in a couple years, this receiving core is going to be really good. But they've got Tay Martin as their go-to guy. He's the only big receiver. He's I forget what he's listed as, but I think he's it's 6'1", 6'2", not a real big guy, but he plays like a big receiver, possession guy, listed at 6'3" here. Average 13.5 yards per play. He'll be an outside guy a lot. He plays by himself a lot. And then John Paul Washington's a guy that is he started playing a lot more down the stretch. He's one of their freshmen. He's a possession guy at 6 foot. They've got a couple twins that are part of their lineup too. One was kind of a bigger factor earlier in the year, the other one later in the year. I think one of them had sort of an injury early in the season, but they're interesting players too. Blaine Green and Bryson Green. They come from Allen High School, which is where Kyler Murray is from. Really good high school players. And they've both produced this year. Jaden Bray is another freshman I like a lot. Really talented kid. And then they've got some good guys coming off the bench. Rashad Owens comes off the bench. Brendan Presley comes off the bench as a sophomore. He's a guy that played a lot more early in the year than he has later in the year. They've cycled a lot of different receivers through. Rashad Owens is the other guy that has that has some size to him. He's a guy. He's the guy, Vince, that caught that post route for a touchdown in the first game against Baylor. The one deep shot they hit against Baylor, that was Rashad Owens who caught that. He's about 6'2", 200 pounds, redshirt freshman. Jaden Bray's got some size. He's got some length to him, but he's kind of skinny. Another freshman. He's one of their big play. He's one of their few guys that I worry about as being like this guy can stretch the field. He's going to be Jaden Bray in a couple of years is going to be their guy, in my opinion. He's going to be really, really good. So they throw a lot of bodies at you, but there's no one that like right now you're like, you got to take care of that guy like we've seen so much. I mean, Notre Dame's had a lot of that. I mean, Drake London, Josh Downs from North Carolina. I mean, go back the whole season, Alec Pierce from Cincinnati. There's David Bell from Purdue. There's been a lot of receivers, the Wicks kid from Virginia. There's been a lot of receivers. You're like, you can't let that guy beat you. There's nobody like that for Oklahoma State.
And you could make the argument that this kind of a team is even more dangerous, though, because they don't have the one guy that can beat you, but they've got a lot of, I don't want to say average because that might sound demeaning, but like they're all kind of on the same level as far they don't have that alpha, right? So you've got to be sound defensively to take care of all of them. Right? I mean, because look, Sanders is going to go through his reads when he has an opportunity to do so, and he's going to find the open guy. And based on the yards per play and the film that I've watched, he's not afraid to take the check down. Like he'll take the
sometimes
open guy.
He goes there a little bit too much.
I absolutely agree with that. But you've got to be ready, and you can't if you just play off coverage the whole time. They're gonna nickel and dime you down the field.
Right.
I mean, that's just what they're gonna do. So you have to be able to play defense from sideline to sideline.
Right. And especially out of this is their traditional spread set. This is the thing where they're going to run zone and read zone out of this. They're going to run RPOs. They're going to run perimeter screens. This is kind of their stretch you out and try to create creases in the run game. That's kind of what this group is. This is an example. Oh, let's get that. That's not showing up right. Let's go to Zoom to fit this bad boy. Let's go. Come on now. This should have already been done. This is their 11 personnel. Now, this is their 11 personnel from a really standard set. 2 receivers to the field. They'll have in this instance, their tight end is in the backfield. They'll do that a lot. Number 1, that allows him to block the edge effectively, but also puts him in position to come backside on counters, the power O. Well, really the power O is their counter. Essentially, they wrap the guard kick out and then bring the counter around. It's not a counter. It's more the traditional old school power O, down blocks, kick, wrap. They'll run that a lot. They'll also do a lot of read zone. And I have an example of that I'm going to pull up later to show you that that's one of the plays that really concerns me is the way that and Notre Dame's done that in the past too, but we'll discuss that a little bit. But they'll run a lot of bunch out of this, Vince, where they'll bring the 2 receivers down and they'll have the tight end bunch there. They'll move him around with some quick. And the other thing about being in that alignment that we see here, when he's in the backfield right here, you can see is they'll do some boom motions, which means he'll just kind of go right before the snap outside or the opposite side and try to get you in a leverage standpoint. And then, of course, if they run inside zone, he can quickly just seal the backside edge from that alignment too. And they'll ISO him. They'll just have him go right down. Now, where they really like to do the ISO, Vince, is out of their 12 personnel. And everybody knows I love the diamond personnel. Now, I don't like diamond out of 2 tight ends in the game as much.
Yeah,
but this is their 12 personnel diamond formation. They ran this a lot against Baylor in the first game where they won. And what they did with this, Vince, is they had the guards and the tackles block out. The center blocked the nose because Baylor was running some eagle stuff. So they kind of blocked out. So eagle is, you see they got double 3 techniques here, right? And then they had edges. So what Oklahoma State was doing, and they had some success with it, is the guards would just block out here on, like right here, the guards would block out right there and there. And then they would take these 2 tight ends right here, and they would just ISO them right on the backers, just like bam, just down right on the backers.
So it's not a double and climb situation. It's just these guys are on those guys,
right? Yeah. Right, and just that was their A-gap blocks, just wham, just hit them right up in the middle. So and then they would just run downhill, and they were able to grind out some tough yards on that particular play, and so they'll do stuff like this. In some games we don't see the diamond hardly at all, if at all. Yeah. Against Baylor, we saw it a lot because it was a counter to this 3-man look that they were showing. I would imagine if they think they can get Notre Dame in a lot of 3-down looks, they'll show some of this stuff against Notre Dame's 3-down and just hammer it. And so
because that's just old school man on man football. I mean,
yeah, ISO. I mean, that's it. Yeah, just
that's what
block
it is,
out
man.
and just
Exactly.
right downhill with your tight ends
Yep.
and run ISO. I mean, I can't tell you the last time I'm watching film like, dude, that's ISO.
That's ballsy.
Right? Like,
I love that. Seriously, like that's smash mouth in your face football, man. Like I dig it.
And we didn't see it a ton outside of this game, but they'll do it. They'll do it. And you got to be careful because they'll also, this is where they'll run a trick play. This is in the past. I again, I didn't go through every single game. I didn't see it this year. In the past, they've lined up like this, and they'll run a trick play where they'll wheel a guy, they'll do a play action, they'll send one of those guys that looks like he's going to ISO, and they're just play action, and he just runs right past the linebacker, and just boop, throw it over your head.
Yep.
So you always got to be careful with those type of things. But that's really when you look at the personnel groupings, Vince, that's really pretty much what they do. What I like about what they do, however, is out of that, they'll line up a lot of different ways. They'll go bunch, they'll move guys around, but they do quick motions, as you mentioned. They don't do like a lot of they'll do like a quick motion. And they don't motion as much in the games I saw. They don't motion as much this year as they have in the past because they're trying to just get lined up and go.
Right.
But they have used it at times effectively, which I like. But they mix up their personnel and then they just go and they kind of stay in that personnel until there's an incompletion or a stoppage, and they don't do a ton of
motion slows you down. You're not going to,
right.
I mean,
and
just inherently
as well. Yeah.
Inherently you take longer when you're motioning. I mean,
right.
To snap the ball and what they're trying to do when they go with their quick stuff, I mean, they're going like the play clock's at like 25 or more a lot of times. And so, I mean, the play's getting off within 15 seconds of the last play ending is what I'm saying. So they go fast. I mean, and they're not going to mess around. They get lined up and they go. So that's definitely something.
But they can slow it down. That's the thing I like too, is they're not stubborn with their tempo. If they feel they need to slow it down to control the clock, or if their defense needs a breather, or if the tempo is just not working, they'll slow it down. They'll start moving. So they can adjust. And I like that. And like I said, look, they're not a real explosive group, but I think they're a fundamentally sound, well-coached football team.
I agree.
I think the problem is their quarterback's just doesn't make enough plays. He's too inconsistent. If they had a better quarterback, I think they'd be a better offense, which makes them dangerous when Spencer Sanders has a big game. That's the concern, is you can't let him, and we'll dive more into this as we get into personnel and some of the other matchups. But when he's good, they're dangerous.
Yes.
They're very, very dangerous. When he's off, which is more often than not, they're not that good. Like, he was really good against Kansas State, really good against Kansas State. And they beat a good Kansas State football team convincingly. He was very good in that game.
And he was really good in the first half against Oklahoma.
Yes.
I mean, I think they scored almost every time they got the football. Yeah. So, I mean, they moved the ball down the field, and he was dynamic with it. I mean, he was on with his throws, and he was great with his legs. And so he can be dangerous. That's the thing. You can't let him dictate to you the way things are going to be played. That's the biggest thing.
Right. You can't let him get comfortable.
Right. Absolutely.
And we'll dive more into that. And he's the guy that can beat you with his legs. He's the guy that can beat you with his arm, Vince. They'll do things where they'll move the pocket with him. You were talking about that earlier when we were doing prep before the show. Is like they'll just not even just they'll bootleg and they'll run nakeds and bootlegs, which a lot of people do, but they'll just straight move the pocket. They'll just
the whole line just starts.
It's like a sprint out. Yeah, it's like a sprint out, right?
Yeah.
They'll half roll it and do things to protect him and give him easy reads, give him a one quick read and just let him get the ball out. And
that's why they've only given up 16 sacks on the whole season.
Right.
I mean, it's partly because of his legs, but it's partly because they protect him. I mean, they do things to protect him, I should say, because the offensive line isn't amazing. It's not like they're a finalist for the Joe Moore Award.
So, right? Vince, I was going to dive into the run game first, then pass game, but let's go pass game first, because it's kind of we're kind of talking about it now. When I watched their offensive line, I'm thinking, man, like before I looked at the stats and I just watched their line, I was like, man, they give up a lot of pressures because they'll get beat a lot. And then I'm like, they only gave up 16 sacks this year. I had to do okay, maybe CFB stats was wrong. Let me go to Oklahoma State's. But I'm like, nope, I only gave up 16 sacks. Part of it's because they get rid of the ball quickly.
Right.
They move the pocket a lot. And then he takes a lot of hits. He is good at he won't take
He
a
doesn't
ton
go
of
down
sacks.
necessarily in the first hit.
Yeah, and he doesn't take a lot of sacks. And sometimes you're like, dude, you probably should have just taken a sack there. You know what I mean? Because like some of those should have been sacks or like interceptions. And you saw that because Baylor, he'll just try to throw as he's getting hit by 3 guys, and the ball just kind of floats up in the air.
Right.
You know, and so it's interesting because, you know, concepts wise, they're similar to what they've been in the past, but just not nearly as creative.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they'll run ISOs, you know, like they'll do, you know, they'll like there's I didn't bring the play up here. Let me pull this play up because I want to show like an example of what I'm talking about. But like they'll run a lot of horizontal stretch stuff, which everybody does, right? Everybody has some horizontal stretch stuff. They have some things where they'll run 4 verts. They'll run deep, high, low concepts off play action, which is basically just a post and a drag or a post and an in or post and a wheel, some kind of play action deep shot, which, you know, is typical. What they don't do, they run a lot of levels, but they don't run as much. They used to run a play that I loved. It was basically like they would just run crossing routes, but they would have guys in position to block as soon as the crosser caught the ball. It was basically a screen, downfield screen, which they never called. But as soon as the guy would catch the ball to the middle, like the tight end and the backs would just go block people. And then they would kind of run crossers, like they would invite the pass rush and they would run across. And it was like a screen. It was like a crossing. It was like a screen. They don't do a ton of that anymore. They don't do as much of the really creative downfield stuff because, again, I don't think they trust Spencer Sanders to go through the progressions the way that past quarterbacks have done. So kudos to them for kind of going away from that. You know,
understanding what their strengths and weaknesses are. That's what a good offensive staff
doesn't really read that stuff. There's, you know, they'll do some high-low stuff, and I'll pull this play up here because this is an example of what I'm talking about. Just a basic concept that they ran early against Baylor. On this particular play, they banged an out cut. So basically what they do is this read is, so the quarterback will get it and he'll look for an access throw here. Okay, this is called, do you have a free access throw? That means number 1, off coverage. Number 2, there's nobody in the window, right? So free access. This route is independent of this concept here. Okay, so on this particular play, he takes the snap, he reads it to the right. And if that corner bails, he's going to bang the out cut, which is what happened on this particular play. Okay. Now, if they take that away with either a press corner here or in a safety, or if there's a guy in the window,
your mouse isn't showing up. Are you on the wrong screen?
Yeah, I am. Okay, sorry, I was on the wrong screen. So we're talking about this guy down here, right here, right?
Yep.
Now, this is sort of the access. So if this guy's pressed and there's a corner safety over top, okay, then that's taken away. Or if there's a flat defender here in that window, there's no free access, right? The access is closed. Then they'll come back to the read concept over here. Does that make sense? And on this particular play, they banged this out cut. Later in the game, they threw a different route, and then they threw a crossing route later. So they kept running this concept. Again, in this game, they've run things like this before. But this route right here is independent of the rest of the route concept. And so he'll catch it, and he'll just throw it. Now, what they'll do, too, is if this guy's pressed and there's just one safety in the middle of the field, they'll catch that, and they'll convert that to a go route, and they'll take that deep shot. Right. So they'll take that deep shot sometimes. It's more about, but like here, when the guy's pressed, if there's a safety over top, that's gone, right? The access is gone, or if there's someone in the window.
And that's what we call a pre-snap read. You're gonna see that before the ball is snapped. That's why it's a pre-snap read, and you're gonna know, okay, if it's this look here, he's looking over outside at the wide receiver. But if he's if the defender's up pressed and there's a safety over the top, like where the 12 is, then you're not going there, and you know to look, okay, I'm looking left when the ball is snapped. So that's all pre-snap reads. I just want to make sure everybody understands that.
If that pre-snap read tells him that free access throw is gone. So if this throw is gone pre-snap, then he comes back to this concept.
Right.
This is kind of what we call a triangle concept, right? Because if you look at it, it's kind of a triangle right here, right? So it's not a traditional levels concept that we often talk about, right? It's more of a triangle read. And so what will happen is he'll read the high-low, and if the high-low is jumped, he comes back out to this combo here, which is the tight. So the way this works is you can kind of see it here. It's this is what I call a post-snap switch, okay? So this guy right here is receiver number 1. Can everybody see that? The tight end here is receiver number 2, and then this guy is receiver number 3, based on the pre-snap alignment. Now, post-snap, however, number 3 becomes number 1, number 2 remains number 2, but then number one becomes number 3. So the tight end comes first, and he runs kind of an in cut, right? And I tried to draw it up how it was. Now we can't put film out here because then we'll get dinged, and I'm not trying to do that. And then so once he clears, then number one, the guy number down here, number 3, will then follow, get right on his butt and run a crossing route. And the quarterback will read these backers. Okay, so if the backers bail, he's just going to take that check down. He's just going to hit that cross right now. Okay, if the backers come up, then he's reading that safety. If the safety jumps it, then he goes back to his combination over here, right? And so then this guy kind of comes late. He widens out. He just sits, and then this back will run a swing to wheel. What that basically means is he'll run a swing, but if he gets to his swing and it's not in a place of going, he'll then just wheel it up, right up the side.
So if a defender it comes down hard to try to protect that swing pass, then the momentum is for the running back to just wheel it right up the sideline.
And they'll just straight do that sometimes.
Sure.
They'll tag that, and you can tell he's just running. He's running that.
Because if you know that those linebackers take bad angles on that kind of a thing, that's a pregame,
right?
A pregame planning thing, right? So
explain this, because like this is the thing, Vince. Because like what if this corner comes down? Like you're going to really, a lot of this is determined if this corner down here is reduced because it's a bunch formation. That's what Vince is getting to. Like it's a bunch formation, so the backers everybody's kind of inside. So this backer here or here, depending on who's covering the back,
have the running back potentially.
Yeah, and he's going to have to climb over top of some trash.
Exactly.
And so that's why they'll sometimes just run that and see how do they defend it. So if these backers are playing, if either the flat defender here or this backer here is playing the running back, he's you can out leverage him and take off
easily.
So if they feel that this guy is checking the back, Vince, that's when you're going to see this guy just take off on sort of a wheel concept.
Yep.
And that's when they'll do it. So like this is just one example. They do a lot of different things like this. This is more of a triangle concept than a pure levels concept. And it's just one of those different things that they'll do. They'll also do a lot of things, Vince, on the perimeter. We talked about like ISOs. They'll like it's kind of the air raid principles. There's still a lot of air raid to this offense. It's not quite like it, like a lot. It's not an air raid offense per se, but there are some air raid principles to it. It used to be very much like an air raid type of thing, but it's not now. They'll run RPOs, they'll run quicks and screens and things like that. But the thing that they don't have, Vince, that I think hurts them more than anything is within all of this, all the stuff they do is predicated on having playmakers at receiver. Absolutely. And that's the one thing they just don't have on right now. Now they have
solid guys. And they're young. They're solid and they're young, but there's no alpha, right? I mean, there just isn't.
Or even like a guy that's like, even as a young guy, you're like, boy, you get this guy in space, he's really electric. They just don't have those kind of players. Right. They don't have that burner type. Again, I think Bray could be that guy. He's young. He's the one guy that I do see some big play potential. But they just don't have a lot of guys that they catch that screen. You're like, uh-oh.
Right, exactly.
Like they would, like Josh Downs from North Carolina would just be killer in this offense, right? Like that's the kind of thing that they don't have right now. They don't have that De'Ami Brown like North Carolina had last year, which is why North Carolina's stuff is so good and Oklahoma State's pass offense has been bad. It's not just the quarterback. They haven't had the difference makers at receiver the last couple of years either. And so it's not a super complex pass offense, Vince. It's really not. It's kind of this is. They used to be a real big play of pass offense. They haven't been this year. It fits right into their whole philosophy of ball control. Just move the chains, be efficient. They'll take some shots, but they're not a real explosive, high octane pass game like they used to. I mean, you go back and look at some of their numbers from when Brian Kelly first got to Notre Dame, for example. I mean, Brandon Weeden was putting up monster numbers. In 2010, he threw for 4,300 yards. The next year, he threw for 4,700 yards. The next year, they had three different quarterbacks. The next year, they threw for over 4,000 yards, threw for 3,600 the next year. Then they kind of started to go down a little bit, 31. Then they jumped back up when Mason Rudolph had a year under his belt. He threw for 45.91. Then he threw for they threw for 4,200 the next year. And then once Mason Rudolph left, he threw for he threw for 4,904 yards in 2017. It was him and James Washington were dynamic. Marcel Aitman was part of that group as well. That was the last really great pass offense they had. Taylor Cornelius threw for a good number of yards the next year, but he wasn't as effective. It was a volume thing. He threw for 3,978 yards. They only averaged 8.2 yards per attempt, which is a good number, but not the kind of like Mason Rudolph the year before was a 10. Mm-hmm. You know, the year before that, it was a 9.1. Like, it was a bigger play offense. And then Spencer Sanders took over in 2019, and they've just been kind of a, pass for 2,900. Last year they were at 239 a game, pass for 2,600, but that was only 9 games. This year they're at 2,867. They're just not the same kind of team that they were in the past. And they don't run it like they used to either. And that was a really overlooked aspect of what Oklahoma State has been in the past, is they, the quarterbacks and the receivers get a lot of the credit. They've had some really good running backs in the last 10 years. We talked about Chuba Hubbard. Justice Hill was a really dynamic back for them, had 2,000-yard seasons for them. Chris Carson was a big JUCO kid. Desmond Rowland, was a solid back. Joseph Randall was a beast on those 2010 and 11 teams. So, Kendall Hunter, I mean, they've had some really good backs. And Jaylen Warren is a good back, but he's more of a grinder. Mm-hmm. At least that's what he's been. He's more of a grinder than he is a big play guy. But I also think it's partly because of their line. I don't think it's a really great dynamic line.
Sure.
And I don't think because they don't scare teams as much on the perimeter, I don't think teams are vacating the box as much as they used to, because they're not afraid of the perimeter pass, which means there's more space, there's more bodies nearby. I think that's hurt their run game too. I think the lack of the perimeter, just the impact perimeter players the last couple of years, I think has not only hurt their pass game, I think it's really hurt their run game a lot too.
Well, and Warren doesn't strike me as a home run hitter anyway. Like, he's a between the tackles, guy that's just gonna fight for the extra yard. Runs the ball hard. I mean, he runs the ball very hard. There's no question about it. But he doesn't scare me. You know what I mean? Like, short yardage stuff. Yeah, you guys better be on your P's and Q's, with him. But he's not a guy that scares me like he's going to take one to the house. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So, but he is somebody that you have to account for, obviously. But yeah, he's a guy that's just going to take it between the tackles and bruise you. Mm-hmm.
So, run game wise, Vince, they are going to run stuff that Notre Dame fans have seen before.
Yes,
they run a lot of stretch. Now, they'll run outside zone, but outside zone and stretch are basically the same thing. The difference is the reason I call them different things is the blocking is essentially the same. The read is similar. Outside zone is more of a lateral run. It's like what we see Notre Dame do a lot from the gun, where you're kind of reading it. He's going to go outside, then make his read for a vertical cut. Mm-hmm. Stretch, they run a lot of out of pistol, because they run a lot of pistol runs. And the stretch is more of a downhill outside zone, as opposed to outside zone, find that crease. Same blocking scheme, most likely the same aiming point for the back, but it's more of a downhill run with a real quick vertical insertion
with
or
a cut,
quick bounce.
Yep,
right.
Yep.
I think they're better at the outside zone than they are stretch, just because I think outside zone gives their backs a little bit more room to kind of plant, and they get a little bit more of that fast swipe thing going. Their stretch in the games that I saw wasn't quite as effective, because I just don't think they get a lot of great movement up front. I think that's been a thing. They get, like Baylor especially, really knocked them back on the front side. And that's going to be a key for Notre Dame, Vince, is you've got to set the edge. If you set the edge against their stretch play, it's not going anywhere.
Right.
But they'll run inside zone. Their inside zone is a little bit different. Like Notre Dame's inside zone is a downhill cutback run. They will take that front side. They will bounce it front side if the read is there, but like any inside zone, it's designed for the cutback. And so they'll run inside zone, they'll run stretch, and then they'll run power O, which is an old school run. It's just a kick out. It's a man scheme, kick out, and then a wrap. They'll run it a couple different ways. They'll they'll do it where it looks more like counter, Vince, where they'll take the backside guard and they'll kick him out, and then they'll take the tight end and wrap him. But the running back footwork is more like power, meaning counter, you get some kind of delayed jab step and then you go. They don't really sell counter that way. It's just he just takes a step, delays, and then goes. It's an A gap to cut back run. More so than it is a counter. They'll run some like quick G wrap stuff as well in the run game, but it's an old school. They'll run Q draw, the quarterback draw.
They want to get him involved.
Right.
They want to get him involved in the run game.
And that's where you get a little bit like they'll run speed option and they'll run read zone. Speed option is essentially it's just an option play where the quarterback takes off on the edge and he's either going to read the end. If the end comes, he pitches it. If the end goes, he tucks it and runs. And they'll run a speed option. Well, they'll actually seal the outside edge and then pitch off the perimeter player.
Right.
And so we'll explain what a couple of those mean. I want to pull up the play that concerns me the most in this game. Quarterback draw, which we've seen Notre Dame have a problem with. But this is their read zone concept, okay? Now, what I like about what they do is they'll run read zone and they'll actually have a lead blocker, which we've seen Notre Dame do at times with Tyler Buckner. So this player right here is the backside. So they're going to run inside zone this way. So their linemen are all going to step left. They're going to power step left and block inside zone to their left. And then when they run inside zone a lot, this tight end here will just come and he is the guy that's supposed to block the backside edge. Okay. That's what they do a lot. Well, when they run read zone, what they'll do is this is the read key. This edge player is the read key. Okay. And so they're all going to block. They're going to block zone. So they'll handle the 5-man box. He's going to come here. And if the DN crashes down on the run, he will pull it. If the DN stays up, he'll hand it off. What makes this effective is they'll send this guy right to the outside hip of the tackle like he's going to block the edge, and then he'll just keep going. And what happens is on this particular play, it's about a 20-yard run. This guy collapses, and they now have a lead blocker in space for Spencer Sanders.
Yep. So he's on that safety area. Really, what the rule is, first man that shows, right? But most likely it's going to be the safety because those two backers that you just talked about, they're taken care of in a perfect world, the way it's drawn up. They're taken care of by the line because it's 5-on-5.
Right. Because these two guys down here are going to combo block this 3 technique up to the backer.
Exactly.
Now, sometimes if this backer reads it correctly and he sees that guy going,
he'll be outside before they can get to him.
But that's what makes the read so effective, because if that guy goes, these guys are trying to play the option or the pull too much, then he just hands off and they just cut right where he left from. Or what'll happen is if you see this backer really playing this guy, well, you can't run the read, because then this guy can play this guy will take this guy will take him. You can't just hand it off and say, hey, we'll hand it off and run at that guy, because this guy's crashing from the backside. So what some teams will do against the triple option or against the read zone is they will have this guy crash and they'll fold this backer over top, right? And so what you can do, so what Oklahoma State will do is they'll just seal this guy backside, and if this guy's playing, then they may give and just try to use the fake to get this backer moving. Yeah. And then if he doesn't move, then sometimes they just get you. So they'll mix it up pretty effectively, but he'll get in space on this play, and he's good in space. But they'll run this. Speed option is a similar principle. Okay, so what they'll do with speed option is and ignore the formation because it's a different play. But actually, let's go to one of the previous looks to get a little bit of a better idea. So let's go with this particular example. Okay, just pretend the back's to this side. All right. So what they'll do is they'll do speed option one of two ways. They'll either take this guy right here, this edge player, and just option him, or what they'll try to do a lot of times is if he's in more of a traditional end set, they will block him with the line, and they'll option off of this guy out here. So everybody see that? They'll option that guy. So it's more of a wider break. Okay. And so that's something that Notre Dame hasn't seen a lot of that this year.
Sure. No.
And that's something that you're like, okay, how are they going to play that? Because they don't run it enough to where I feel like you need to be super, super prepared for it. But they run it enough to where if you're not prepared for it, he could cut that thing up and beat you. Or if you collapse on it, then he pitches it and you're outside.
Yeah.
And the one thing about this matchup is the Notre Dame corners are going to have to be really good in the run game.
Yep.
more so than even more so than normal.
Because they're going to try to stretch you like that.
Right.
What they want to do is they want to get outside and they want to stretch you and get you spread away from the box. Right. That's the whole point of these of speed option. Speed option is it's called speed for a reason. One, because you're not taking the time to do the first part of a triple option. Right. So it's speedier. And the other part is you want to get to the outside. The speed part of speed option is let's get to the outside now and figure out what we want to do once we get out there. Like it's get to the perimeter because we feel like we have an advantage on the perimeter.
Right. So they're, like I said, they're a heavy inside outside zone team, but they run enough downhill stuff in quarterback draw that you can't really it keeps you honest. You can't if they're beating you with the outside stuff, you can't just take off because they have enough stuff, they'll just run right at you to be effective. So the thing I like about their line, Vince, is they're not super talented. They're not super athletic, but they're really fundamentally sound.
They work well as a group. Yeah, I thought
their timing is good.
Yeah,
explain why that's important in his zone offense, Vince.
Well, because you have to work together. I mean, you have to know even without talking, without saying. And there's verbal cues. Don't get me wrong, but when you're doubling and climbing, when you have two guys on the offensive line responsible for two guys on the defense. You have to double, and then you have to know which guy, number one, is going to come off because of the leverage and things that you've got. And then you've got to know when to come off and what angle to come off to go get that linebacker. So you have to be able to trust the guy next to you because you have to play head up, not head over, checking to see what your buddy's doing. There's a trust level there, and there's an experience level there when you're running this type of a zone offense, right? To, okay, hey, I got it, go, or so we've seen in the past bad zone teams, both guys will leave. One guy will leave before the block is secured.
Hey, Vince, we don't need to talk about the Notre Dame offensive line. Okay.
I was trying to be nice. I wasn't naming names or anything. All right. But that's where you have to have that team, that understanding of what the guy next to you is doing. And it's so important when you're running a zone offense. And like when they moved the pocket, for example, they moved it to the right in the one play that I remember off the top of my head. They all took the same steps at the same time, moving the pocket to the right. Like, it's a well-coached offensive line. I mean, they're not the most talented guys in the world. You can manipulate this offensive line, and Notre Dame has the defensive guys to do that, to get into the backfield, to beat these guys. But they work really well as a group. They just do.
And that timing part is so important.
Yeah.
And that's where that trust you were talking about comes from, because if we're working a combo block, I'm blocking his outside. I'm expecting you to get it far enough to overtake him so I can then go to the second level.
Exactly.
So there comes a point in time where, like, I feel you inside of me, like on the inside of me, and I know you're there, and I can just go because I trust that you're going to finish it off. Where and sometimes, early, but if I don't feel you coming from the inside, then I may be nervous about it. But if we have a trust, then hey, I don't necessarily feel him there yet, but I know he's going to be there, and I'm just going to go.
It's huge because if you leave too early or the block isn't secured, now you've got potentially two guys that are not blocked properly.
And the play's blown up because that's the first line of defense. I mean,
exactly.
That's the key to it. But they're a really well-coached unit. They're tough, right? They get after it. They're just not super athletic and super talented.
Agreed.
And that's the thing, is that's where Notre Dame is going to have to take advantage, because Notre Dame is going to have an athleticism advantage.
Yes,
in this matchup.
Big time.
No doubt about that.
I don't want to give away too much, but it's an advantage for Notre Dame right now. Like that matchup is an advantage for Notre Dame, but they're not playing a group that doesn't play well. They're just playing in a group that's overmatched.
You have to beat them.
That's the difference.
Yes, you have to beat them. And that's the thing I like about it. And even like pass game, like they don't make a lot of mistakes in protection. They don't make a lot of mistakes like, oh, gee, they just turn that guy loose.
But they get beat.
They get beat.
They get beat. Yeah, exactly. And there's a difference to that, right? Like so what you're saying is turning a guy loose. So if you are you're talking about protection. So we saw this earlier in the season with Notre Dame, and I'm not trying to throw them under the bus, but it is what it is. You'd have two guys go into the same place, and they wouldn't block another guy, and he would come loose. He would come unblocked to the quarterback, and that's when, Jack Cohn would go turtle mode and just go down because he's done. Like, there's nothing he can do about it. What you're saying about this line is that they pick it up, but they
Mhm.
might get beat. I mean,
Right.
they just might get beat in a one-on-one situation. They're there. They're not going to turn them loose, but they might get beat. So
Right.
it's a big difference, but the outcome it could be the same.
Right. The one thing they do have, what I do kind of say that they have going for them, that's a bit of an intriguing matchup for Notre Dame, is they do have some size at a couple spots. You know, they're not huge, but they've got a 325 pounder. They've got a 310 pounder. Everyone they have in the lineup is at least 300 pounds.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in today's era, that's not huge, but it's big against the Notre Dame defensive line that's not huge. You know, Kurt Heinrich is 290, 295. Jason Ademilola is 280, 285. Foskey's 250, 260. Meyer Tungavaloa is 265. Howard Cross is 275. Jacob Lacey's 275. Riley Mills is 275. Notre Dame is not real big.
Mm-hmm.
So it's going to be important that Notre Dame's defensive system be called for. Use your athleticism to your advantage.
Right.
If this game becomes about who has the better athletes up front, then it's advantage Notre Dame. If it becomes about a power game, like who's the bigger, stronger group, then it's advantage Oklahoma State, because they're strong kids, pretty strong kids.
Sure.
Not super, super strong, but, pretty strong kids, but they got good size to them. And if it gets into a game where like they can kind of get their hands on you and get their feet moving, they're going to have some success. What Baylor did a great job of, really, especially in the first matchup when Baylor did have success, because Baylor gave up a couple big runs in the first matchup, but they didn't just gash them the whole game. And when Baylor had success with their run defense, Vince, they were just beating them upfield,
right.
And it was with penetration at times, but it was also Oklahoma State's linemen on their outside zone tend to lift up at the snap of the ball, and good teams will see, like good defensive linemen, like smart defensive linemen will see that, and they'll hammer it. They'll get up inside of their numbers, and they'll just kind of lift them and kind of ride them back. And that's when you see them not having success, because their rushing offense, as we said earlier, they average about 100. What was the Vince, about 181 yards a game?
Yep,
if I remember correctly.
Yep.
But some of that's been benefited by a couple big games.
Sure.
You know, they had 447 against TCU. They had 292 against Kansas. They had 246 against Boise State. They had 54 against Southwest Missouri, only 136 against Tulsa, 137 against K-State, 107 in their loss to Iowa State. They only had 103 in the win over West Virginia. They won that game 24-3. They had 140 in their win over Oklahoma, and then they only rushed for 66 yards on 40 carries against Baylor in the rematch. And so now they ran for 219 against Baylor in the first game, but they had a couple big runs that kind of padded that. But Baylor completely shut them down in the second game when it came to running the football. Right. And a lot of it is just get off the line, get up under their chest, and drive them back. That's on the outs. If you see that guy fast swiping and trying to work for width and he stands up, you just get to wherever your gap is, your angle is, and just get up in his chest and knock him back. Because that's when you can have success, is when you throw off the timing of their run game. Because that's the key to this game, Vince. And we'll get more into this. But if they can't run the ball, they have no chance. No chance.
Right.
They're just not good enough throwing the football right
now. They have to have balance. Because if they don't have balance, you can overplay and just you can dominate them. I mean, for lack of a better term, right? I mean, when a team is one-dimensional and they're not elite at that dimension, it's not going to work out well for you. You need to be balanced. And if they're not balanced, they're going to be in trouble offensively. Mm-hmm. Just nothing against them. It's just that's football. I mean, you have to be balanced.
So as we kind of wrap up just this breakdown, Vince, obviously we talked a lot about Jaylen Warren as a player that Notre Dame fans are going to need to know. If the only time you watched Oklahoma State this year was the Big 12 title game, the only thing you know about Jaylen Warren is they kept talking about him not playing because he did not play in this game. And that also hurt their run game against Baylor, is they didn't have Jaylen Warren. The other, Richardson and Desmond Jackson, are not Jaylen Warren. They're not as good as he is, in my opinion. You need to know the name of Tay Martin, the receiver. He's a guy that you have to worry about being a possession receiver, can make some plays down the field. The other receivers, again, the guy that I probably worry about the most for this particular matchup is Jaden Bray. Now, he only had 12 catches this year, but he led their team in yards per catch of anyone who caught more than one pass at 20.1 per catch. that's the kind of thing Notre Dame has to be wary of, is that those 3 or 4 just big plays that they can make in the pass game.
Sure.
And Jaden Bray's the guy that worries me about that. And at the end of the day, it's going to come down to Spencer Sanders, the quarterback. If he has a good game, Oklahoma State's tough to beat. If he doesn't have a good game, they're immensely beatable. And so that's the guy that you also look at and say that's going to be the key. So like I said, Vince, well coached. It's one thing you and I both said when we got into, like, but this is a really solid, sound, well coached football team from a fundamental standpoint. They're not overly creative schematically, which is honestly was the biggest. The thing for me, Vince, I think that's the thing I was most surprised by when I started diving into Oklahoma State, because we're so used to over the years of them just being this really creative, up-tempo, fun team, and they're just not that.
They're pretty basic, to be honest with you. I mean, and again, I'm not trying to cut them down or whatever.
It's actually smart coaching
because of what you need to be based on your personnel. I mean, you're young at the skill position players, and you've got a quarterback that makes mistakes. I mean, plain and simple. So you don't want to put him in as many positions to make those mistakes as you possibly can. And when you're creative, quote unquote, right, a lot of times you're counting on your quarterback to make good decisions. And at times when they've been not as good offensively, their quarterback isn't making good decisions. I mean, that's just a fact, right? So, so playing it a little closer to the vest, playing some more fundamental type offense, things like that is very beneficial. They're playing to who they have. And I would imagine, if I was going to look into my crystal ball, I would say that as these skill guys get a little bit more experience, et cetera, then you can open things up a little bit more. You can do a little bit more, and depending on what the quarterback situation is like in the future. So, but yeah, I agree with you. I think I would fall on the side of it's really good coaching. I think that they're using the guys to the best of their ability, and they know that they have a really good defense. And it's kind of hey guys, don't screw it up. I mean, that's part of it. Don't screw it up. So they're doing what they have to do to be successful. And guess what? They're a 10-2 team, I believe, right? Or 11-2 team.
11-2, yeah.
They're doing the right thing for them.
Yeah.
And they're playing in a New Year's Six Bowl against Notre Dame. So
that's right.
Believe me, we're
an inch away from being 12-1 and having a legitimate case to.
Yes. I think they probably would have been in if they
I
would have been a discussion. There would have been a discussion.
I don't think they leap Cincinnati at 13-0. I just don't. I think, Cincinnati beat a top 20 team convincingly in their title game.
That's true.
That
is true.
I think there would have been a lot of people at ESPN that would have pushed for it, but I still think at the end of the day, the committee would have gone with the 4 that they had in. But it would have been a much more interesting conversation, in my opinion.
Absolutely. Oh yeah. Because by the way the day went, we knew who the top 4 were going to be.
For Notre Dame, I think Oklahoma State at that point in time was the only team that could have had a shot, because they would have been 12-1.
Right.
They'd have had 3 top 10-ish kind of wins, top 15 kind of wins. It would have been an intriguing conversation. I don't think they should have gotten either, because they had a lot of really close, ugly wins. Now they won, but that's the thing. Ultimately, at the end of the day, their offense is designed to protect their defense. That's ultimately at the end.
Exactly. Don't screw it up.
I've never seen an Oklahoma State team do that.
Right.
I've never seen it before.
Yeah, I agree.
It's usually the defense is like, just make a stop or two so we can outscore the opponent.
And again, they're not your typical Big 12 team.
Right.
They're not.
Right.
So people are expecting fireworks who've not watched Oklahoma State.
Yeah.
You're going to be disappointed.
Yeah.
You're going to be disappointed because they're led by their defense.
Yeah. So, look, anything can happen, but I'd be surprised by that.
And to be honest with you, there was a question down here at the very bottom. I was scrolling back up to the top, but Ed had a comment that I want to bring up. He says that since this could be viewed as game 1 of next season, is it possible that Oklahoma State will try to open it up more and use more complicated schemes in the bowl game? If you're a Notre Dame fan, you hope that that's what happens, because they're going to make mistakes and Notre Dame will pounce all over that.
And they're not good enough up front to protect all game either.
That's not who they are.
And I don't think that's how anybody really views the bowl game. I don't think most people view bowl games as game 1 of next year. Most people view it exactly how Marcus Freeman viewed it, which is finishing, Yep.
Exactly.
Now, are there things that you can do in the bowl game to kind of help prepare you for next season?
Course.
Sure, if you have guys missing, but Tommy Reese isn't out there calling plays, and Mike Gundy and Casey Dunn, the OC at Oklahoma State, they're not going to be out there calling plays thinking, well, what can get us in position to be successful next year? It's how can we go beat Notre Dame?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's going to be the key. Now, if they
know what got them here.
Right. Now, that doesn't mean they may not throw the ball a ton. They may try, and that may be part of the thing is to generate some big plays because maybe they look at this game and say, you know what, I don't think we can run the ball on Notre Dame.
Right.
Because, at least not
and that would be game plan, yeah.
Right. Because traditional running offenses haven't been very good against Notre Dame since the Florida State game. And as we said before, that was about quarterback scrambles and the 180-yard run that was off of a mistake. I mean, even North Carolina, if you go look at their 224 rushing yards, their running backs did almost nothing in that game. It was all Sam Howell and scrambles. That's where almost all their rushing yards came from. They had Ty Chandler had one big run, and that was it. It was all quarterback draws and scrambles from Sam Howell. Notre Dame has done a pretty good job against stopping traditional teams.
Runs. Yeah,
yeah, agreed. They've held 5 teams below 100 yards, including Cincinnati and Wisconsin. Look, the 3 best teams Notre Dame played this year, we would all agree, are Cincinnati, Wisconsin, and Purdue. Correct? Not one of them rushed for over 100 yards against Notre Dame. Right. Not one of them. Virginia didn't run for 100 yards. They were at 82. Stanford was at 55. And then some of the teams that did go over 100 yards, Toledo had 124 yards on Notre Dame. 67 of them came on one run.
Yeah,
right. Virginia Tech had 127, and I guarantee at least 40 of those were scrambles by the quarterback. 129 from USC. That was Notre Dame doing what they always do against USC.
At the end of the game,
we're going to let you run the ball.
Yeah, go ahead.
That's not what you want to do. Right. And they still only went for 129. Navy went for 166, which is about 80 yards below their season average. And then Georgia Tech went for 128, and about 30 and 40 of that came in this after Notre Dame had pulled their starters.
Right.
So Notre Dame's been pretty good against traditional running teams. And I think Oklahoma State's coaches are smart. Casey Dunn's been there for a long time. And he's going to know, look, we're just not going to run it down Notre Dame's throat. They're going to have to do something to get Notre Dame off balance. So that's why I think we're going to get a heavy dose of Spencer Saunders on the perimeter early in the game. Right, get Notre Dame chasing outside and thinking outside, which then opens up. Now you then come back to maybe the inside runs. Do things with your outside. I think we'll see a lot of outside zone versus stretch, I would imagine. If they think they're just going to run the stretch play at Notre Dame, then that's poor preparation, and I'm going to lose a little respect for their coaching staff. I think it's going to be, let's get the outside zone. Let's try to create creases that we can then hammer. Let's get Spencer Sanders on the outside. Let's widen him out with our formation, then run RPO with the QB draw.
Right.
Which basically what you do is like little fades, quick outs, and then you read it. If the flat defender takes off, you pull it, and you got a running back leading for you on a quarterback draw. Those are kind of things. So you kind of almost steal a page from Notre Dame's game plan, which is, try to, use your perimeter pass, use your quarterback on the perimeter, use your quick throws in your pass game to then soften up the run, because it would make sense to do that. Take some shots early, because if I'm Oklahoma State, if I can hit a big shot early and soften Notre Dame's run defense up, that might be our chance to do something.
Sure.
But at the end of the day, they're a team that likes to run the football.
Mm-hmm.
And if Notre Dame can stop them from running the football, Oklahoma State may make a big play here and there, but they're not going to consistently beat them. If they're going to beat Notre Dame, it's because Spencer Sanders has a big game running and a big game hitting the ball down the field. That's going to be the key.
Agreed.
And so that's what I think their game plan is going to be geared towards against Notre Dame. So that's the Oklahoma State offense.
Yes, sir.
As best as we can do.
That's the overview. We're going to dive deeper in with matchups and some things like that.
Right. We'll get into specific personnel and, those type of things when we do our sort of our stacking up type of features and things like that. But this, at least we wanted to kind of give an overview of who Oklahoma State is.
Exactly.
And give you just a little bit of a taste, bit of a taste of what you see. So, Yep. So, yeah.
Do we want to jump into a few questions before we take off? Okay.
Yeah,
cool.
Let's get some questions.
I got one lined up here from Sean. He says, anyone know if Notre Dame is going after the wide receiver that is in the transfer portal, Jay Fleming? I know Notre Dame was recruiting him pretty hard out of high school. Seems like he could fill a need.
I didn't know that he was officially in the portal yet. Is he officially in the portal now? That's Julius Fleming from Ohio State. What's
He's
funny?
number 4, right? Isn't that who he was? I thought I saw remember.
believe so.
Is that right? I think that's right.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's fine.
Yeah, but I didn't know that he was officially in the portal. I mean, that's a guy you'll look at. Sure. I'm looking at here. There's one in April. No. Yeah, I haven't seen anything. I don't think he's officially entered the portal yet. So, yeah, I don't know if he's officially entered the portal yet. I would imagine he'll be a guy they'd look at because he's a guy they've already, and we talked about this when we were doing our sort of a review, is the best guys that they can go after on the portal are guys that they recruited in high school because they've already vetted their academic
because they already
situation.
exactly
right.
That's exactly right,
and they know the family a little bit and that kind of thing. So I mean, would I look at Julian Fleming? Yeah, I'd look at him, but I think fans kind of have this thing of, oh, Julian Fleming means you're getting a 5-star player. If Julian Fleming was a 5-star player,
he wouldn't be transferred.
I know that Ohio, well, not necessarily. He would have played more than he.
There you go.
Than he did. I mean, you look at Ohio State, he had 7 catches for 51 yards in 7 games. You know, last year he had 7 catches for 74 yards. Look, I know Ohio State's loaded at receiver, but he would play more than that if he was a 5-star. I don't know if he's still that guy. Now, maybe it's just he's a bad fit. I mean, here's where I could be wrong. He may just be a bad fit.
Right.
Maybe he doesn't mesh well with the receivers coach. Maybe his game is geared more towards thing that isn't where Ohio State's offense is geared towards. Because if you look at him, Julian Fleming's to me a thicker, stronger kid. 6'2", 205. Yeah. Their receivers are more shifty, great route runners. Maybe it's something like that. So I'm going to be open to it. I would definitely look at him. I just don't know if I would treat him like the savior of the receiving corps because he was a 5-star, like some people that I've talked to have kind of feel that way. So, that's kind of my thoughts on him. But yeah, I think they're going to obviously look in the transfer portal. There's still some high school receivers that they're looking at. We've got some things on the message board about that, but certainly the biggest recruiting right now, though, for Notre Dame when it comes to receivers is going to have to be the guys on the current roster.
You betcha.
They got to get all them back first.
No question.
That's absolutely what they need to do first. Is you got to get Kevin Austin back.
Yep.
We have some news about Avery Davis and whether he's going to come back on the board. He is, from what we're told. So, but if you were on the board, you'd have known that a few days ago already.
Yep, I knew.
Got to get Braden Lindsey back. You've got to keep Deion Colsey and Lorenzo Styles. So that's priority number one. Is that group right there?
No question about it. Got another one here from Craig. This is going to be projection on yours and my part, I do believe. But he says, do we know who is returning punts?
I would imagine it's going to be Matt Salerno.
He's the number 2 on the depth chart, unless they just, Nick Lazinski decided to change stuff up.
If I'm Marcus Freeman for this bowl game, I'm like, just field the punt, right? We can figure out what we want to do next year, but for this year, just field the punt. Let's, just catch it. Don't worry about. You have all spring and all fall camp to figure out, if you want to be more aggressive with your return game.
Right.
Absolutely. I'm not putting that on Nick Lazinski to say, hey, Nick, go get a return going.
Right.
Maybe Nick could do it, but it's not that I don't think Nick could do it. I'm not putting that on him. I'm not putting that kind of demand on him.
Right.
That's unfair to him, a guy that's just now taking over special teams.
For one game at this point.
Right.
With 15 practices to prep for, and for me, my expectation of Nick Lazinski, there better be 11 guys on the field every time.
And everybody do their job.
Yeah, and do your job. Like, let's just keep this thing rolling for one game, and then we can kind of step back and figure things out. Like,
right.
That's all I want from my special teams coach.
Get them lined up, get them playing hard, and get them playing discipline. That's it.
I don't want them running out for an extra point and then looking back to the sideline like we got 10.
Right.
That's what you need.
Or shoot, that guy folded inside on the kick return and he sprung a guy loose for a big play.
Right.
That's the stuff I care about.
Yep.
Don't let the ball roll to the 2 as a punt returner. Beyond that, just field the ball. That's the big thing for me. Yep. The only place I would have any kind of creativity is in kick return. That's because that's the one area say you got a pretty dynamic guy back there.
Let's get him to work.
Let's use him.
And since he's here's a question I'll throw out there. Since he's now probably your number 1 back, you still have him on kick returns?
Yeah, but I don't know if he's your number 1 back in the traditional sense. Chris Tyree's not carrying the ball 25 times against Oklahoma State.
Absolutely agree with that.
Being the
That's
starter,
not who he is. That's
right,
not who he is.
right.
Yeah.
Being the starter isn't necessarily make you there's difference between being the number one back and being a feature back in the traditional sense.
Right.
Like I've said all along, if Chris Tyree does not touch the ball 10 times a game on offense, you're not doing this coaching thing correctly.
Right.
If he's healthy. Now, I still have him back there in kick return because he's as a kick return, he's going to get at most 2 or 3 shots to return,
Maybe,
if that. Because teams kick it out of bounds and hopefully Oklahoma State's not kicking a bunch.
Lot. Yeah, exactly. Maybe once, twice.
So yeah, I mean, if you only get 1 crack or 2 cracks at a return, I want my guy. It's not like it used to be where when the field goal, the kickoff was back more. I think the balls were different back then. You didn't have fair catches where you got a lot of shots to return kicks.
And you took a lot of shots.
Right.
Like
I still remember Clint Johnson taking one back against Stanford. It's like maybe it wasn't as deep as it is in my head, but as a teenager, I feel like it was like he was like 8 yards deep and he took it back. You know what I mean? Like
that's just not how it goes anymore.
No, it's not.
Coaches
it's not
because
it's the analytics and it's field position and all that kind of stuff. Whereas it used to be where your special teams is an opportunity to make a game-changing play. Yeah. It's not quite that way anymore.
So here's one we could do an entire show on, but I'm going to throw it up. Joshua B says, sorry if it's not on topic. Or no, he says, sorry, it's not on topic. He knows. What are the common denominators that you guys see in the recent CFP champions? And if Notre Dame is lacking in any of those, how can Freeman and company close the gap?
We could do a whole show on it. We have done a whole show on it, but we could also say it in one sentence, one word: offense.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, offense.
Because we've said it in the past. Look, defense will get you to the championship. You need offense to win it.
Nowadays, yes. I mean, look here. Last year's champ. This is title game. This is the number of points scored by the team that won the title in the title game: 52, 42. 44, 26, and that was a game of 2 SEC teams. 35, 45, 42. That's the number of points scored by the national champion in the championship game. If you go back to I mean, even the year before, Florida State had to score 34 to beat Auburn. Alabama scored 42 against Notre Dame the previous year. You have to go back to 2011 and 2010 to go back to a time when you had low scoring title games, unless it was a matchup of 2 SEC teams. So you got to score, and Notre Dame has not had an offense that can score in big games at all. The closest they came to it was 2015, and even then, 28 against Ohio State. 22 against Clemson. They scored better than they have, but it still wasn't enough. So, yeah, I think in recent years their defense has been good enough. They haven't been good enough on offense. And how can Freeman and company close the gap? Number one, you demand it of Tommy Rees to have a dynamic offense.
Yep.
Okay, number one, you demand it of him. Number two, you give him the resources he needs from a coaching standpoint to get that done. And number three, that's where recruiting comes into play. So it's up to Marcus Freeman to make sure that he hires coaches that can be effective recruiters, that he gets rid of coaches who are not effective recruiters, replaces them with guys who can teach and recruit, and that he serves his role as making sure that he's playing his part as the head coach to get the best players here.
Right.
And the biggest part of that is you need a dynamic quarterback. And that's going to happen in 2 ways. 1, coach Tyler Buckner up, and 2, make sure you go get some dynamic quarterbacks in 23 and 24 and 25. Those are the things that Marcus Freeman and his staff can do to close the gap. And I've said this before, well, Notre Dame has to close the gap at receiver, and I'm like, no. Okay. 2017, you put Lamar Jackson on that Notre Dame football team, nobody beats him. Agreed. Nobody. You put Trevor Lawrence on that 2018 football team, and Notre Dame wins a championship that year. I'll take that to my grave. So twice in the last 5 years, Notre Dame was a quarterback away from either winning or at least competing for a championship, in my opinion. And that's the difference. They got to get that kind of guy. They need to get that dynamic quarterback. Now, if you have elite talent around him, can a Jack Cohn win you a championship? In some years, yes. This year, yeah, I think he could have. Last year, he's not going to, because you're not going to outscore last year's Bama team. You're not going to outscore the 2018 Clemson team or 2019 LSU team.
LSU, that's where I was going to go.
Or the 2018 Clemson team.
Right.
This year was different. This was Vince's and I's whole point from the beginning of the year.
Yep.
This year was different because Alabama was rebuilding to a degree. Ohio State wasn't the team that they were in the past. We said that before the year. Clemson was going to take a step back. We called that before the year. And because what Vince and I said is Trevor Lawrence and to a degree Travis Etienne masked a lot of other warts that existed otherwise.
Right.
And this was the year where you could have won a title with a Jack Cohn. But in 2019, the only way you beat LSU is if you also have a dynamic guy there.
Right.
And then you've got to have great players around him because Clemson had that dynamic guy, but Clemson wasn't good enough everywhere else on both sides of the ball to beat that team. So it's about the offense, and that's the key. Now, to me, the defense is good enough to, hold LSU under 40. Like, some of the defense that even could have held that LSU team under 40, but that means you held them to like 35, which means you got to score 36.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's the difference. You're not beating them 24 to 21.
You need to score, period.
Right.
You need to score.
We saw that against Clemson in 2018, right? Notre Dame held them to 30 points. That was one of the lowest point totals they had all year. It was over 2 touchdowns below what their season average was coming into that game. The problem was offense.
Yeah.
And that's key.
Got another one here from Monster69. Merry Christmas, Brian and Vince. Can't say enough good things about you guys. Thank you, Monster. Appreciate that. You're a good egg, too. When do you think we will hear about who the next defensive coordinator will be? I would personally think probably that first week of January would be my
It'll
guess.
be sometime after the bowl game. I don't know if they'll do it necessarily right away.
It depends. Here's what I'll say. If it's going to be in-house, it'll be fairly quickly after the bowl game, I would think. If it's going to be out-of-house, we might hear some rumblings and things, but that process takes forever to, to finalize, right? The background check and all that fun stuff. So if it's in-house, I think you'll hear sooner than later after the bowl game. But if it's out-of-house, I think the longer it stretches on, I think the more
it may take the reason why is they may know who they want on January. Right. They may know who they want now. But as we all know, when Notre Dame goes outside the current program to make a hire, the background, which is I understand, and I'd rather go through that than to bring in a coach that you find out lied on his resume and hypothetically speaking.
Yeah.
And then, you feel the need to fire him because of that. So, I never understood that, by the way.
Lying on your resume?
Why that was like a fireable offense. Like, why did you even need to look at George O'Leary's resume? Like, you know what I mean? Like,
because it was he lied about what he played in college, right?
No, I thought it was like where he went to school, like he got a master's or something like that.
Is that what it was?
Something like that, something silly like that.
It's like an integrity thing.
I get that, but it's like, why does it even matter? He's a football coach, you know. And then his thing was somebody put that on there, and I just never paid attention. I'm like, if anyone that knows about coaches when they're older, they don't look at I guarantee you, George O'Leary hadn't looked at his resume in 15 years.
You're probably right about that. And the fact that he had to submit one is dumb too. I will agree with that. Like, do you need a cover letter? Like, you need a resume and cover letter? Is that you came after me?
Yeah. What's your resume? Here's my record. Here's my record.
The whole thing was just weird. I mean,
it really was.
I'm with you on that one. We've got some talk here about Eli Raridan because he tore his ACL
in a basketball game.
Yeah. And so I'll just throw it up. There's a bunch of stuff over here, so I'm just going to throw it up. People are asking, if he's going to be ready for fall camp, and all these different things. And look, from what I can gather from the minuscule amount of research that I've done, we don't really know the severity of it. We don't know anything about what's going on. I don't believe he was going to be an early enrollee. So he was going to be on campus in June.
He wasn't going to be part of spring ball anyway.
That was going to be 6 months at the earliest. And so, fall camp, that's 8 months from now. Could he be ready in a limited role? Yeah. But I also don't think Notre Dame was looking to have him be a part of, not be a part of it. That's not what I meant, but they're not counting on him to be a player this year.
Right.
So take your time, man. Like rehab, get yourself back like that. That's my opinion.
Right. And John Gallagher said goatee Brian confirmed. This is not a goatee. It's just the shadow of
Right.
the light in here makes us look. If you actually get close, there's not a goatee. It's just that
It looks very goatee-ish, though. It
it's
does.
not. It's
Yeah, I know.
not. It's just the shadow and the thickness of it. So yes, I do
Wait
not
till you
have
get down. They start getting crazy.
Do
with
not
what
have a
we
goatee.
need to do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I saw some of the craziness. Some people have a little bit too many sugar cookies today, I think. So
yeah, exactly.
yeah. So no, I don't think he'll miss the football season. He's not 100% by the time football season starts, but he'll be with the team next year and he'll practice at some point in time next year.
We do have a super chat here from Vincent. Great name, by the way. Vincent Stark, thank you very much for the super chat. The Vince DeDario new car fund. I'm not sure what that's about, but hey.
Did you say something about needing a new car?
I don't think so. I mean, the wife's got a free.
We were talking about your car yesterday. That's right. Because you kept talking about the new car smell. That's
the new car smell.
Yeah.
There you go. Yeah, I don't.
Because you've used that example like 75 times the last week.
Twice in 2 shows, though, but they're back to back.
Because you used it twice in one show.
Okay, all right, fair enough.
75 is the hyperbolic statement I make to get my point across.
The new car in our family doesn't go to me; it goes to the wife who carries the kids around. I get the A to B car, so hey, man, it's all good. We're good to go in my house. But thanks, Vincent. I appreciate it. Still, I'll take it. Thank you very much.
I like this one. Thank you. This is nice.
Absolutely. From OC Irish fan. It's been a long time guy in our chat, so appreciate person in our chat. Thank you very much. God bless IB Nation. Okay, thank you.
That one I know.
Okay, awesome. God bless IB Nation during this Christmas season and throughout.
I'm so in your head on that. I'm sorry, man.
You are.
I'm sorry.
He's like rented space, like right here.
I'm sorry. I tend to have that effect on people, apparently.
It says, thank you to Brian, Vincent, Sean for all you do. Go Irish. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
OC. Very, very much appreciated.
I appreciate that.
Johnny, excellent review. You guys do one of the best jobs at breaking down games that I've seen on the various message board. Thanks, Johnny. That's kind of what we stake our claim on, right? It's breaking it down like coaches, and that's what we get geeked out about. So that's if we weren't doing that, I think we would be in withdrawals. To be honest with you,
Father David asks, new question: what's the difference between outside zone and stretch? We kind of talked about this a little bit earlier, but he might have missed. I want to be clear on this because there are some differences. The basic philosophy behind an outside zone and a stretch are the same thing. It is a fast swipe zone play that's working for width. The running back is going to either make a move off the inside hip or outside hip of the tight end, or where the tight end would be in, because what you'll do is pretend there's a tight end there. You'd work to where his hip would be. Or some teams are smart about it, say, okay, there is no tight end, so you just work to the outside hip of the tackle and look for green. But basically, it's a outside zone. Both are outside zone concepts. A outside zone. Now, a lot of people, Vince, will just call it the same thing. And it's just if the back is in a pistol or an eye, he just takes it downhill. And
the reason they do that is because the blocking is almost identical. And a lot of times you'll call it the same thing because the blocking is the same. And then the running back just knows what to do. Because look, linemen are not worried about necessarily what's happening behind them. They know what they're supposed to do up front. And then
they don't care.
Exactly.
They don't care.
Exactly. I was trying to be nice about it, but they don't care.
They don't care what the running backs do. Just don't run into my back. As long as you don't do that.
Right. They know what they're supposed to do. And so when I was working with linemen, we would say, hey, you're going to block this the same way we block this. And they're like, okay, that's all we need. And then they stop listening. Right. Like so.
Right. Now, some teams will teach it with a little bit of a difference, meaning a stretch is more of a downhill run. When you watch Oklahoma State run their stretch play, and the reason I separated the two is because they'll do it a lot out of the pistol, and it is a downhill run. I mean, it is a hard vertical 45-degree angle downhill. They run it a lot out of 12 personnel.
It's almost like a power angle.
A really aggressive, and then it'll be like a quick vertical insertion or a quick bounce, but they're still stretching the play. An outside zone is more of a run for width. And when you see the hole about to open up or you see a hole open up, you plant and you get vertical.
Stick your foot in the ground and go.
Right. And so, I think of the old school Broncos, with Terrell Davis. They'd run the heck out of the outside zone. And back then they would even run it out of a toss. because Elway would run it out under center. This is before the shotgun runs were really a big thing. They'd run the stretch, but they would just toss it, and Terrell Davis just literally run almost laterally, and he just wait to find a hole and just hit it. So on those plays, the read for teams that teach a little bit differently, the read will be a little bit different. The timing is definitely different, but the responsibility basically from the line is essentially the same thing. What may change from an outside zone versus stretch is you may run it formationally different, meaning outside zone, a lot of times you may run to an open side, meaning no tight end. A stretch play, a lot of times, I like stretch better to a tight end, personally, just because I feel like you can protect the edge better, because what will happen with the stretch is good defenses, if you're running a stretch, especially in the boundary, they'll just crash the edge. With the backer, or will just flow over top, and or a safety will come down, or the corner will come down. They'll just crash the edge. An outside zone, if you crash that edge, I'm planting and I'm cutting back more. It's also, I think, easier to get a really true cutback out of the wide handoff. If it gets blown up, I feel like the back is in better position to kind of make something happen. Whereas in a stretch, if you get blown up on a stretch, he's done.
Yeah.
I mean, he's just going to get blown up. It's going to get blown up right into him. And it's harder to bounce off of a crashed edge on a stretch than it is an outside zone as well. Which sometimes is a good thing, because sometimes a guy will try to bounce an outside zone, and it's like, yeah, you should just put your foot in the ground and got -2 on that one, buddy, because that's better than -8 from you trying to go bounce around a crashed edge. But just the nature of the beast sometimes.
Drew has an off-topic question. He says, what do you guys think? Do you think Florida is a good spot to be? Do you think Napier will do well?
I think Florida's a good job.
I think you can win at Florida.
Yeah,
I do.
No question.
Yeah, because you're sitting right in the middle of fertile recruiting ground. Right. I mean, yes.
Really nice campus.
And look, you got to compete against Florida State. You got to compete against Miami. No question about it. But look, now's the best time to be doing that. Like, go get your dudes. Like, and I think the Swamp is a cool place to play. I think there's a lot going on positive to be at Florida, right? I think you can be very successful in Florida.
I think the thing about Florida, and this is just true of the entire state, is you have to be more willing to battle for your in-state kids, because more and more kids are willing to leave now than they used to be.
Sure.
So you can't just assume that kids are going to stay. It's a different era. Kids aren't as willing to do that. More kids are willing to leave, and more schools are willing to battle them. Yep. And if you look at where Gainesville is located, I think it's good location. You can get to Tampa real easily. You can get to Jacksonville real easily. It's not too far from Miami. I think it's good location. I just think it's one of those things where Florida's a really good job, but it's not the kind of job where it's easy to recruit there, like it used to be at Miami. You got to put in some work, and I that's why Florida's been like a little up and down, right? And if you look at Florida, they haven't really won great without a great coach.
Right.
The Spurs are a great coach. Meyer was a great coach. They haven't been great with some of the other coaches, because I don't think it's as easy as people think it is. But it's if you hire a good coach and he hires a good staff and you put in the work, you can certainly have success recruiting.
I think that's the difference. I mean, and look, you could say that about just about any job, right? I mean, you can be successful there, but you got to put in the work. Like you
there are some places where it's a little easier than others.
Sure.
I mean, you got to be a pretty bad coach not to recruit Ohio State, just because it's just kids grow up bleeding scarlet and gray, and we've seen mediocre coaches have great success there. John Cooper being an example, Earl Bruce. It's not a great coach in my opinion. I mean, better than mediocre, but not a great coach. And they all had success there more than these guys in Florida that have just flamed out, because you don't have two other in-state schools to battle against, and it's just, there's only, not just battle against, but that's what the kids growing up. I remember when I moved to Jacksonville for my senior year. It was actually the end of my junior year. I played spring ball down there. And I remember that, like, it was torn. Some guys were Georgia fans, some guys were Florida fans, some guys were Florida State fans, some guys were Miami fans, some guys were Bama fans. It's not the same as like in Ohio where it's like, yeah, most people are just Ohio State fans. Now there are some Michigan fans here and there and some Notre Dame fans in certain parts. Like Northeast Ohio has more Notre Dame fans, but I mean, vast majority of people are Ohio State fans because that's it. That's the program. That's the big school in Ohio. So a little bit different. But as far as Billy Napier, I thought Dan Mullen was going to be great there. So I'm at the point now where I'm not going to try to predict. I think Billy Napier did a great job at Louisiana.
Yeah.
Great job at Louisiana. Will he do well at Florida? Couldn't tell you.
We'll see.
I have given up trying to. Yeah. I
That's
mean, if Dan Mullen can't win there, I'm like, okay, I don't know what it takes to win there.
Yeah.
You know.
Right.
So yeah, that
we'll see.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, Tyler had excellent analysis, guys. Appreciate the breakdown. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
If you got one that you want to throw up, go ahead.
Yeah,
sir.
it's right below it. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Cool. John says, not a defense question, but will Chris Tyree be 100% for the bowl game? I'm pretty sure he was 100% at the end of the season. Am I wrong about that?
No, you're not.
Yeah.
By the last couple games, he was healthy. Yeah.
Right. So, yes, I would assume that he will be as well. Yeah. Jonathan, what are you hearing on the Slovis front? Huge fan of Tyler Buchner, but Slovis could be a nice addition, and I love more competition.
They're not gonna bring. They're not bringing.
There is no Slovis.
They had an initial conversation. Yeah. That's about as far as it went. I can say with confidence that Tommy Rees really likes the quarterback room, and they're basically looking for a quarterback who's okay coming in and being part of a depth chart, not a guy that wants the job. And that's why Slovis is not going to be the guy. They know that this is going to be a Tyler Drew battle, but they also know they need another quarterback from a pure number standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why they're doing their due diligence. But that conversation did not go from very, very far from what I'm told. And I'm not a huge Slovis fan. I think he's very overrated.
Agreed.
I don't understand the infatuation that people have with him. They say, "Oh, look at his numbers." I'm like, "Yeah, look at his numbers. He was one of the least productive air raid quarterbacks of the last 10 years."
Just is what it is.
You know, and the next time he goes through a season without getting injured will be the first time he goes through a season without getting injured. So I just I've never understood the infatuation people have with Keaton Slovis. Other than he wasn't a very highly ranked kid who had a really good freshman year, and so he becomes a storyline. But no,
right,
hard pass on that one.
Angelo has a question here. He says Notre Dame defense is on point. How confident are we that Notre Dame's run game will be effective with Kyron out? Should the offense start with Tyler? If not, will the run production be enough with Jack only?
I'm confident that the running game will be fine from a running back standpoint. My issue with the run game has nothing to do with Kyron Williams being gone or Tyler Buchner being a quarterback. It's about, can the offensive line block? Oklahoma State's got a really good run defense. We'll dive more into this tomorrow. But if the line handles its business, they'll get enough. They'll run enough to keep Oklahoma State honest to open up the pass.
And that's
game.
what you need to do.
That's what you need.
So Notre Dame in the second half of the season has been a pass first, run second team. They just have been. So
now, if they can't throw the ball and run the ball, then that's when you go to Tyler Buchner.
Right.
I mean, that to me, this game is different in that regard, Vince.
Right.
Whereas during the regular season, it's like you don't be too hesitant. Don't be too quick to go to Tyler because Jack's your guy.
Mm-hmm. In
this game, however, there is no next game. If you're not moving the ball with Jack at quarterback, go to Tyler and try to spark something because you got to win the game. There is no tomorrow when it comes to this football team. This is the last chance this football team has a chance to play together.
Exactly.
And they've got to get a win.
Yep.
And so now maybe then that softens things up and Jack can come back in and get them going. But the key is going to be use the pass game to get the run game going, like we've been saying all year. Use the pass to set up the run. If they can do that, they'll have some success, in my opinion. And they got plenty of backs. And Kyron Williams is a great player, but they'll be fine there. The question is how will they be up front? That's going to be more of the question mark.
We do have a super chat down there.
I can go get it.
You want to grab that for me? Omar, thanks for the super chat, man. This one's out there, but we're gonna go for it, man. He says, "What's more embarrassing, Ask a non-pregnant woman when she's due, mistaking male-female by voice on a phone call, or misgendering people on social media. I've done all three.
The first one for sure.
Yeah, I wouldn't touch that first one. That's why you just don't ask, man. Like,
yeah.
Let them bring it up in conversation. Never ask that question. Ever. No, nothing good can come of it. I mean, just nothing good, man. Nothing good can come from that. So that's Omar. You stepped in it, buddy. If you've done all three of these, so I'll just say
I have no comment on the last two, but the first one is real embarrassing.
The first one's tough, man.
And every time I think of that, I think of Grown Ups. Remember the movie Grown Ups? When someone's like, "When's the baby?" What baby? Well, what baby? It was really funny.
Oh, it's good stuff.
There's another movie where that happened, and I'm trying to remember what it is, and I can't. Horrible Bosses, which is a really awful movie, but there was a scene about that in there too.
So we got a very interesting question. I don't know if you know the answer to this one. Brian says, I have one little off topic. Eli Raridan signed, but is not an early enrollee. Does Notre Dame oversee his surgery?
They will be able to have a role in that. Whether that means they have someone because there's two reasons why. Number one, his dad's an alum, so he would have a connection in that regards. Dad's alum, and I think Grandpa's an alum, so Notre Dame will be enrolled. So I would imagine this is not a definitive. This is what's going to happen because I don't know. But what normally happens in these instances is if they don't get here where Mr. Radigan can do the surgery, he will have a hand in helping them make sure that they're getting to a surgeon that'll do the job done the right way.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, now that he is signed his letter of intent, he is a part of the program.
Right.
Meaning part of the program, not a part of the program, which is one of my biggest social media pet peeves.
That's a good point. And then they will also be very involved in his recovery, his rehab.
Right.
I mean, they'll give him a plan. It'll be very structured and will be overseen by Notre Dame. I have no doubt about that at all. And if I'm them, I welcome that. I mean, why would you not want one of the best strength and conditioning and trainers and all that to be a part of you getting back to health? I mean, that's what I would want.
Right. I mean, the only thing it would be is if there was legally, like by rules, they couldn't have an impact, which would be the case if he hadn't signed.
Right.
But he has signed.
But he is signed, so you should be good to go there.
Right.
Sam says, hey, Brian and Vince, I'm normally not able to catch the show live, but I'm on my way from New York to South Carolina for Christmas. Love the show and hope you both have a Merry Christmas.
Same to you, Sam. Thanks to you.
And
smart move getting into the southern part of the country for the holidays.
No doubt about it.
Much warmer, not as much crazy traffic. Here's a good one from Jacob. I like this because I think he's referring to the transfer portal stuff, and it's a great point.
It says it seems like every time someone hears a big name, they freak out and get excited and don't even pay attention to how bad people play. Yeah. It's a really good point. That's a really, really good point.
Right. And somebody else, Chris Broughton, had a great point too. So Slovis doesn't fit our system.
It doesn't. Notre Dame doesn't run that at all. I mean, yeah. Yep.
Yep. You can keep going, Vince. I'm just pulling some of these up while you're.
No, you're good. Christopher says, I only watched Oklahoma State in the Big 12 title game and on an extended highlight versus Oklahoma. Is it me, or does Notre Dame just have to play conservatively and wait for them to shoot themselves in the foot?
God, I hope they don't play that way. I mean, I understand where he's coming from. No, I mean,
altogether. Okay.
I assume he's talking defensively, but God, I hope not. And that's what I'm talking about.
Right.
I don't want him to play that way. I want you to take the fight to them, because here's the thing. I don't think Baylor was conservative. I think Baylor attacked them and forced him into mistakes. That's the key, Christopher, not just sitting back and don't let the ball go over your head, because he's just going to pick you apart or he's going to run. They're going to run it right down your throat if you do that. What Baylor did that was smart is Baylor attacked Oklahoma State, took away their run game, and got into Spencer Sanders' face. That's when Spencer Sanders makes mistakes. He makes mistakes when you pressure him. And so to me, I would be aggressive. And now I'm not saying unsound aggressive, but I'm saying put your four down up there and turn, pin their ears back and turn them loose. That's what I would do.
Mm-hmm.
Although I'm a little torn on that, because part of me is like, I think this is a game Isaiah Foskey could get a couple sacks. But I don't know if I want Isaiah Foskey to get a couple of sacks because I want Isaiah Foskey to come back next year. But the point being, attack Spencer Sanders, attack the line, because if you just sit back, their line is big and good enough to where if you just play conservatively, they'll I mean, you know, the more appropriate term, 4 yards in a cloud of dust you all the way down to the red zone. And they're also a top 35 red zone team. So, you know, they get down there, they're going to get points more often than not. And of course, you're thinking, nuh-uh, because the most recent game you watched against Baylor, they didn't do that, which I totally understand. But more often than not, they've been a pretty good red zone team, red zone scoring team this year for most of the season. So you want to make sure that you're getting them. And plus, I want my offense, if I'm Marcus Freeman in the defense, I want my offense to get as many possessions as possible.
Yeah.
So I'm coming at them. I'm getting early down negatives and really, really pushing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Alan says, I like the way you showed the Oklahoma State offensive plays with the line patterns. Very interesting. You're welcome, Alan.
Welcome.
That was all Brian, by the way. Just want to make sure that's clear. Michael says, this slow work week has been made better by you guys and your great in-depth coverage on Notre Dame. Merry Christmas, fellas. Go Irish. Merry Christmas to you as well, Michael.
Yep.
I think you and I are about to meet.
So Larry says, good Tyler Buckner stats on the message board. Yes, those I put those up. I put those up in an article recently and on the board, and I'm seeing more people recycle them too, comparing Tyler Buckner's stats to, you know, like Bryce Young's from last year and some other people. There's only 2 freshman quarterbacks in the country that had more total yards and touchdowns than Tyler Buckner this year. Tyler Buckner's going to be okay. They're going to be fine. D-Rock says, Matt Freeman reporting Desmond Jackson from Oklahoma State has entered the transfer portal. He was Cowboys' leading rusher in the Big 12 title game. He was the backup to Jalen Warren. He was not technically the backup. He was their 3rd leading rusher at running back. He started in that game. He also wasn't very good in that game. He's the guy that got caught. He wasn't fast enough to get to the edge. Desmond Jackson ran for 139 yards this year and averaged 2.9 yards per carry. They're going to be fine. Dominic Richardson's their number 2 back. He's the better player to me. He did not play well against Baylor, but none of their backs did. But yeah, that's not a loss for them. That's not a loss. And I think we're good, Vince.
Yeah, I think we're good too. I think we're in a good
like
place.
this. Michael Johnson makes good. This is kind of what we're talking about, like how to attack them. Apply pressure, but be gap sound. And that's important because that is, you got to pressure him, but to the point that Michael's making, because we've talked about this in the past, he's mentioned this in the past too, is if you attack, but you're not sound with your gaps, that's when the quarterback steps up and takes off running, which we've seen in the past. And that's where Michael's coming from on that. So because you have to the cutbacks, all of those different things you have to be. Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Timeout Tom says, I wasn't crazy about CJ Williams. He's not very fast or twitchy. I see a technician who's well coached at a high football IQ in high school, and I'm not sure how successful he'll be in college. I like CJ. I don't disagree with either of those. I don't think he's real fast. He's got good speed. He's a good athlete. He's not super twitchy. But there's a lot of value to a technician who's well coached and catches the ball well, especially one who's about 6'1.5", 6'2". So, again, what we said about CJ is why did I like CJ? Because he's a volume pass catcher.
Right.
He's a guy that on 3rd and 5 you're going to have a hard time defending. Not everybody needs to be Will Fuller. Now, do you want a Will Fuller or 2 on your team? Sure. But you know who else I want on my team? I want a Hunter Renfrow on my team, or I want a guy that's going to move the chains. I want a guy that's going to get open. And so I definitely like that. And that's the thing I liked about him in this receiving class is he was a compliment to Tobias and Amore and Walker. Now, of course, 2 of those guys aren't there anymore, but that's the reality of it. But I like CJ a lot. Now, I did not have him ranked ahead of Tobias Merriweather, but he's a good football player. And to Tom's point, I know several people that Notre Dame fans that weren't super excited about CJ when he signed because of exactly what Tom's saying. He's not a dynamic athlete. I think there's a lack of appreciation sometimes for that guy that does the dirty work as a receiver.
right,
and how impactful that guy can be. And that's what I like about CJ. And they're going to need to find somebody that can do that because that role is necessary. The problem I've had in Notre Dame is for too often that's all they've had at receiver, or they've had too much of that at receiver. But I like CJ. I think he's a good football player. I really do. And Michael with a great comment. Good route running is better than being fast. Now, obviously, the best is that you're both of those.
Both? Yeah,
yes,
right.
Yes. But the NFL is filled with guys like that. Cooper Kupp ran a 4.6. Why is Cooper Kupp such a dynamic NFL player?
It's a really good route runner, man. Yeah.
He's not fast or twitchy.
Right.
But he's a great technician, and he gets open all the time.
Yep.
Josh Amundsen, who's calling defensive plays during the bowl game, we don't know the answer to that yet. I'm going to guess at the end of the day it's probably going to be Marcus Freeman, but I don't know the answer to that just yet.
Right.
Yeah, that's kind of that's going to be the thing.
May says a good comment here. Shows like this one are why I love IB Nation. Other sites say technique doesn't matter, but IB breaks it all down. Go Irish.
Yeah.
That was fantastic. I like that.
Yep. That's pretty good. All right. And I think we got a couple here. Just last couple before we get out of here, Vince.
Yeah, Ben says Diggs will probably be the lead back next year, but I would love to see Tyree get a role similar to what Jahmyr Gibbs had at Georgia Tech. Similar sizes, elite speed, can break a game open in the return game.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing is we've never thought that Chris Tyree was a 20-touch plus per game.
It's not
guy.
his game. That's not his game.
The problem that I had with how they used Chris Tyree this year, Vince, is they had him basically run the same plays early that they used for Kyron Williams. When he's in the game, call to his strengths. And hopefully that's something that Coach Reese and Coach Taylor do moving forward is don't ask him to be Vince Logan Diggs or Audric Estime. Just let him be him.
Yeah, exactly.
And get him 10 to 15 touches a game. Get Logan 15 to 18 touches a game. Get Audric 8 to 10 touches a game. And if he's riding, and then ride the hot hand. If that means more for Chris or more for Audric or more for Logan. But you've got 3 really good backs. You should be able to use them all. Right. And, I agree that Diggs will be the lead back, meaning the volume guy. But if you can't find ways to get Chris Tyree going, that's on you, not him. And hopefully that and somebody just said Jahmyr Gibbs transferred to Bama. That is official now. That's been in the works for a while. Bama basically had him convinced to transfer before the season was over with, which is another reason why the transfer portal disgusts me. So, yep. So. Yep. So I think that is going to be it for us today. So everybody, thank you so much for joining us. We'll be back tomorrow at 1:00. We're going to dive into the Oklahoma State defense, and we're going to talk about how this is a really good defense, really aggressive, well-coached defense. I'm gonna have fun. I'm gonna have fun breaking this one down tomorrow. There's no question about it. And Vince is gonna have fun with it. We're gonna enjoy diving into the film, and this is a good defense. And I think if you only watch them against Baylor, you got a taste of it. You saw what they did to Baylor's quarterback in the second half. That poor kid. He was like 17 for 17 at one point in time, and then they figured out how to pressure him, and it's like that poor kid was just like, just getting smashed. So it's good defense, real good defense. It's going to be fun to break it down. So why don't you take us out of here, Vince?
All right, everybody. So make sure you hit that subscribe button. Make sure you hit that like button. Make sure you also hit that notification bell because while we are fairly consistent this week with 1:00 shows, sometimes we have a special show. You just never know. And if you don't have that bell hit, you just don't know when we're going to be there. So most importantly for, post-game shows and commitments and all those fun things. So make sure you hit that. If you're listening on a podcast, go ahead and give us a 5-star review and make sure you subscribe to our podcast. So it automatically downloads on your phone. I mean, it doesn't get any easier than that. You just fire us up when you're in the car and rock and roll. So everybody, hope you have a wonderful 21st of December because hey, we're TikToking it a lot closer to Christmas. So I'm actually going out right now to do a little bit of shopping. So I hope everybody has a wonderful rest of the day. We will talk to you tomorrow on the Irish Breakdown podcast. Can't wait for it. Tomorrow, 1:00. We'll see you there.